Hi, this is Keith Ward with Visual Studio Magazine, and joining me now was today's live 360 keynoter, Kris Lankford from Microsoft. Kris, welcome.
Thank you, Keith.
Okay, so a lot of your talk today was about modern apps, and I wanted to back up a little bit from there and say and ask you then, what is a modern developer? What does a modern developer look like today?
Yeah, so to think about modern apps, right, you have to know a little bit of everything to do a modern app. So whether that's database code or JavaScript or ASP.NET. So a modern developer, and sort of what I picture a modern developer being, is it's got to be kind of the Swiss Army knife of developers, right? You have to know a little bit of everything. So you got to know a little bit of client side, you have to know the server side, you have to know deployment, right? You have to know the end-to-end kind of soup to nuts stuff, which puts a lot of stress on the industry, right? So making sure that we have tools to support that, knowing that everybody has to kind of be that jack of all trades, right, from a developer perspective, is pretty key.
All right. Is it getting harder to just be a guy who does desktop apps, to be a guy who does Windows Forms apps? Or if that's you as a developer, do you really need to be thinking about expanding your skill set?
I definitely think that expanding your skill set, you need to do that. There's definitely a place for desktop applications. The desktop's not going to go away. But definitely making sure that you expand into modern apps, right? Desktop can also be a modern app, right? But making sure that we expand into other places where you want to expand into different sets of consumers, right? And extend your legacy applications, I'll say that.
Okay. So is one of the key features, of course, of a modern app seems to be the cloud component. Microsoft, on one of your slides today, it was called a cloud OS. Can you describe how you would define a cloud OS?
Yeah, so definitely having the ability from an OS perspective, whether you're just running a website or you have full control of the OS, just making sure that you have the infrastructure to scale into, right? So when we think about modern apps, modern apps are not client-server, right? They're scaled out into billions or hundreds of millions of devices. So making sure that you have a platform that can handle that sort of stress is pretty important. So having that cloud OS available with all the services that are on Azure is pretty key. Okay.
And of course, it seems like last week's announcement of Visual Studio 2013 was a big part of that. It seems to be much more cloud-enabled. Visual Studio Online is sort of just the start, but can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so definitely Visual Studio Online is the rebranding for TFS service. There's also a lot of services surrounding that, one of them being load testing services in the cloud, so making sure that whenever we run web applications in the cloud, can we scale, can we test them, can we make sure that they run, and then also part of that is Application Insights as being another offering around Visual Studio Online. So having the ability to do APM and GSM, so making sure that you can scale globally, making sure that you can capture information about your application from an APM perspective is pretty key. And one of those pieces kind of being the load test, right? So making sure that we have a test for availability through that platform is pretty key.
All right. Your demonstration, one of your demos today was about what is codenamed Monaco right now, and how does that fit in with the modern apps theme that was the focus of your presentation today?
It's definitely a key for modern apps, right? Having an editor in the web is, one, it's pretty cool, but two, having the ability to have an editor in the cloud to be able to make modifications to running websites, I think is something that we have to be able to do to respond to consumers on the other end, right? We always can't do a full deploy, right? We need to make modifications kind of in line, and bringing that Visual Studio ID experience to that realm is pretty important, right? So the alternative is, hey, I got to go open this, and I'm going to open it in TextPad or Notepad and make a modification. It doesn't have the same experience.
At the launch last week, I don't remember who was doing the demo or talked about it, but they said that Monaco is really good for certain apps, not so good for doing other types of development. He was able to do a lot with it, though, just through the browser. What would you say is the sweet spot right now for Monaco development? What types of apps?
So web apps are definitely the place where you would be at, a website. And I demoed it today in PHP, so I made modifications directly to PHP. Also, a sweet spot for that would be single-page JavaScript applications. So if you're running those, ASP.NET. So if you're making modifications to an MVC website that you've published, there's some good places in terms of could it be a full editor? You could use it for some of the simpler HTML, JavaScript, CSS stuff. But replacing Visual Studio, it's not there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So compilation of C# and some of those things you just can't do.
Okay, sure. Now, what are some of the next steps that your typical .NET developer, the type you had in the audience today, what are the next steps, the recommendations that you would make for them going forward to transition to the modern apps era?
Yeah, the first thing I'd say is try the cloud. So I asked the question about who's used Windows Azure, and a lot of people raised their hand, right? So there's not a lot of people using cloud. And going forward, just because of consumerization, but also the modern app movement, you're eventually going to have to be there. So knowing what that looks like now from a target perspective is on the roadmap, and it's going to get there sooner or later, so it's good to be ahead of the curve.
Right. Now, one thing that I thought was interesting was as you mentioned, not a ton of hands went up when you talked about who's using Azure. On the other hand, when you talked about who has an MSDN subscription, it seemed like a lot of hands, most hands went up. Those developers have free credits for the cloud. They have a lot of free stuff they can do, building apps, building websites, etc. So it seems to me like they may not be taking advantage of what they already have for free with a subscription. Is that correct?
That's true. So that was kind of puzzling to me too. A lot of people have MSDN, they have subscription, but not a lot of people have used it. I think a lot of that, just in talking to developers, because developers are under so much pressure to get things done, they're that kind of Swiss Army knife, right, of development. They just don't have a lot of time to experiment anymore, right? So making sure that you get time to experiment, to try new things, especially the cloud, is going to be a key differentiator for businesses in the future.
Right. Kris Lankford with Microsoft, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Keith.